Hey, beloved. I'm Lindsay P.H. Jackson, and this is Unlearning. In every episode, we explore the uncomfortable conversations you want in this safe container for ideas that you know and trust. Magically weaving together storytelling, poetry, music, and panel discussions with expert guests, Unlearning is the only safe place to tackle the taboo conversations and questions that most hosts are too scared to take on. In a world where division is driving a wedge between workplaces and dinner tables, it is time to get uncomfortable and unlearn together. Let's take a breath together. Deep inhale in together. Deep exhale out together. Let's learn about these panelists. So today we're talking about unlearning toxic masculinity. And first up, we have Ben Ruler. And so interesting, Ben, as we were putting together this month's panel and people started to see that you were going to be joining us, everybody was like, you know Ben? Do you know Ben? Lindsay, I said you're going to be talking about Ben, and Ben's going to be there. I was like, suddenly I'm in the cool kids club. Ben is the founder and CEO of In the Area Productions, where he supports other white people, especially white men, in progressing on their anti-racism journey. In the 7+ years with Seattle Works, his team evolved from white-founded, white-led civic organization, and power was shifted to a BIPOC-led staff and board, and leadership became more distributed. Welcome, Ben. I really want to talk about this because I remember this great post that you put on LinkedIn as you were beginning to exit that company. Everybody knows that I'm always stalking people on social media. It's basically because am I a homebody? I don't know. But I read this long post and I thought this was so interesting because a lot of white men tell me, I don't have any examples of how to practice an anti-patriarchy approach. I don't have any examples of how to embed anti-racism within my organization. Ben, have you had examples of that, or what was your process as you were working with Seattle Works and now within in the area productions of shaping what does it mean to be a white man doing this work?
Yeah, thanks, Lindsay. And I think I'm part of the cool kids now that I got invited to be here by you. So feelings are mutual. What an honor to be here with you and everyone. I didn't have a lot of examples, so I caused probably a lot of harm. There's probably people who've worked with me and for me who felt like underwhelmed at times, but I always like to say we can always reserve the right to wake up tomorrow a little bit better than we are today. And despite good values and intentions that I think I've had most of my life, that doesn't always translate into good impact. And so I, along with a brilliant team, just kept learning and doing better over time. And those small wins lead to trust, which leads to everything. And so it was an ongoing journey, and I'm really proud of the work we did as a team. And I think, can't talk about institutions evolving without talking about individuals evolving. And the gift I got from my colleagues and from that job was the opportunity to really grow as a human and as a leader, and really looking at power, privilege, and race. And I think one of the best things I did, I'm most proud of, is kind of learn how to get out the way a little bit. And quite frankly, I got a lot of credit for the evolution of the organization because I was, at the top of the org chart with kind of like the external face of the organization as the executive director for so many years. But a lot of the work was really driven by younger people, especially employees of color, who, we really listen to, and we go to trainings and hire consultants and did our homework. And again, I think if something's a priority, how does it show up in our time and our budget? And we just put a lot of time and money into being better. And over the course of years, really evolved the culture of an organization in a way I'm incredibly proud of. Morale improved, retention improved, and business improved. Funding, fundraising, influence. Just a beautiful case study, the biggest privilege of my career, and it informed what I'm doing now.
Wow. Wow.
It's very messy. That's why I'm wearing a hat, because I got a receding hairline. it was really hard. And I really stumbled, but I hung in there, and we hung in there, and change is possible. And it really gave me a visceral understanding of what can be possible when we truly move through that discomfort. Because we white people in particular always want to talk about, we got to get uncomfortable, but being uncomfortable sucks. It feels like anxiety. It is not fun. But I'd done enough work to kind of be able to move through that without breaking down. And what was on the other side is just amazing. So it's really a nod to my coworkers and people I was with at that organization. And I talk about it all the time now.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, first of all, Ben, I think I have one gray hair for every year that I've been a DEI consultant. I think I'm going to start naming them. This one's name is Heather. This one's name is Josephine. But you said this really amazing thing about it takes time. And I think in a culture that is constantly operating within sense of urgency, how did you get to the point of recognizing that time on the front end invested in this would result in more abundance of time and opportunity, better retention on the back end?
Yeah. Well, some of it we made the case and the business case to the board and others. And, we had consultants help coach us on setting up an equity team and spending more time and just creating the space. But candidly, if I'm being very honest, the silver lining of COVID was that our nonprofit got off the hamster wheel of the giant annual gala and the giant annual day of service that depleted our time and morale. And so despite our good values and intentions, we kind of were spinning our wheels for years. And then when COVID hit, we really seized that moment to slow down and do that hard work that I hope we would have prioritized and made happen, but it was hard. And so the other thing is, one of my mentors locally, she leads these peer ED groups, Janet Bogut, she would say, when you say no to something, you say yes to priorities. And especially in the nonprofit sector, we want to be all things to all people. We're very bad at saying no. So we just started saying no more. What can we let go of in the name of priorities, right? And that's hard, but less is more. And we really retrofitted the whole organization. And the last thing I'll say is we had a wonderful consultant named Toy Sing Woo, who reminded us that even though culture is very nebulous, if you don't name it and norm on it, then it's a guessing game. And that guessing game is usually going to benefit people like me. And so we started naming our cultural norms, right? Like, what are our expectations for working from home, for ending meetings on time, for responding to emails, like all these things that any new hire come in and figure out pretty quickly what the vibe or the energy or the culture of an organization is. But we started naming that. A lot of our anti-racist evolution took place in very boring, tedious meetings, in conference rooms and Zoom. And that's what I think I try to remind people is it takes intention over time in perpetuity. And I think after the murder of George Floyd in particular, people are feeling so much intention to do better, but also feeling totally daunted. I hear so many, where do I even start? And it's like, there are real concrete things we can do every day to build inclusive operations. And there's great examples out there. Ruchika Tolshian right here in Seattle wrote a book last year, Inclusion on Purpose, an intersectional approach to creating a culture of belonging at work. It's like a manual on concrete things you can do to advance an agenda of inclusion, down to the nuance like having men take more meeting notes so that office housework doesn't default to women. Some of this stuff is not rocket science. It just takes a time to learn about it and implement it in your organization.
Absolutely. And it's an amazing read, and definitely encourage everyone to pick up Ruchika's book. Muchinga, you talk about a lot of this, but let me introduce you first. Muchinga is joining us today and is the head of programs, Copper Rose Zambia. has 8+ years of experience in social work and public health. Currently, you're heading Kaparo Zambia, but it is one of the largest youth-led organizations in Zambia, championing sexual and reproductive health and rights, HIV prevention, and youth empowerment. And you've served in different positions in USAID in programming. And right now, I think are in the States because you're engaged in a fellowship in the Mandela Washington Fellowship for Young African Leaders Fellow. I will name that I'm having all of my, like egoic fears of when I was 26 and I was like, I haven't done anything. And now I'm looking at you and I'm like, I want to be Muchinga when I grow up. Like, talk to us about, it's helpful when we do have a blueprint like Ben is talking about, but when you were first building Copper Rose, how were you tackling sexual and reproductive health and rights? How are you tackling HIV and prevention and youth empowerment? Did you have other male identifying leaders to look to within that work to get you started on the vision that you had?
Okay. Yeah, thank you so much. And that's a great question. Yeah, so what I would say, basically, I had a number of male leaders and big people I looked up to, but most of all, I think I also wanted just to be my own, learning from other people. But of course, like my experiences really defined me and also created the passion which I have for what I'm doing. So I would say this started a long time ago, I think, when I was young. Most times, being a boy sometimes in Africa can be a hard thing because you're expected to be strong and to figure out a number of things on your own. And most times, like, we are rarely paid attention to when you want to consult on something, when you want to ask about something. Look at most safe spaces in our communities. They are there for girls, and for boys, that is rarely given to boys. So now what the community is doing at the moment, they're trying to bring a lot of empowerment to girls while boys are being neglected. Some examples which I can give is like when we were growing up, we could see our sisters maybe being taken to better schools than our schools where we used to go because they want them to do better and catch up with boys. Probably they are saying girls are undermined in the communities where we are coming from. But one thing I was realizing, that was actually creating a lot of hatred within us boys. Practically myself, sometimes I look at my experience and my sister, sometimes when she went to a private school, I was going to a government school. My parents thought they were creating a better future for my sister in order for her to be able to catch up with society. But on the other end, that idea was not clarified to me. So me, I took it as favoritism. So you see such kind of things. Sometimes when peer educators and other NGOs come in schools to talk about sexual reproductive health, most they'll just be talking about contraceptives which are targeting women. What about contraceptives targeting men? You get the point. So I realized that most interventions which were being given in these societies where you're coming from, they are just targeting women. But at the end of the day, when we grow up, when you're a fully fledged man, they expect you to behave in a certain way. Wow, this has been embedded in you when you are growing up. So now when you look at unlearning that toxism when you're big, it's very difficult because at an early stage when those things were building up, they're not realizing. Because as a man already, they've told you to be strong. They've told you to behave in a certain way. They've told you to say for your life to be better, you need to fight. And sometimes when you look at cutoff points during our time, when you write, for example, your junior secondary exams, for ladies, the cutoff point could be maybe 350. Then for boys, it was 382, 380. So already you're putting that dominance in a guy to say, okay, fine, as a man, I need to do better than a girl. And the girl, for her to be able to perform, you need to lower the mark for them. So already when children are growing up, that is already impacting their mindset. So, when they grow up, there is no you can tell a lady to say you're as good as a man, yet for her to go to college, for her to progress to school, you had to lower her mark. And already that also creates a lot of ego now in boys, and they become a lot more toxic because they perceive to be better, and that's how the society has defined it. So basically, it was these experiences which I was having, which made me to start looking at society in a different way. But from the time I started work and I started realizing sometimes how great women can be, because I graduated in 2015, and just after that, I had an opportunity to join the ESID programming, and I've just had female superiors since then. All my supervisors have been females. And some of the things I've been learning, the skills they've taught me, and most of the things I've learned, it's by working with women. So now I started realizing to say, are men really superior as the society perceives them to be? So sometimes it's about the information which you are sending out to men at an early stage. In as much as you are promoting them to be men, but let us also realize that at the same time, they are also human. They are supposed to behave like human beings and not as men. Because in trying to behave like men, they'll be pouncing on other people's freedom. Yeah. So basically, that's what I would say. Yeah. Thank you.
Wow, wow, wow. Tim is an author and comic book historian. If my darling love Seth is on the call today, he's going to be like, please, can you introduce me to Tim? But comic book historian, the author of Wonder Woman Unbound, Investigating Lois Lane, The Many Lives of Catwoman, Betty and Veronica, the leading ladies of Riverdale. I mean, you had me at hello with that one. In his newest book, Not All Supermen, Sexism, Toxic Masculinity, and the Complex History of Superheroes, came out in July 2022. I really want to encourage you all to pick up this book. Tim, can you expand on what Machinga was just naming there in terms of what are these stories that we tell little boys about who and what they are meant to be? And how do we see that impacting how it pertains to the idea of the superhero, and how it pertains to how men feel as though they are meant to move through their lives and through the world?
Sure. First off, thanks so much for having me. It's great to be here. Superheroes have always been predominantly men from like the earliest days in the 1930s. Like it starts with Superman, you get your Batman, etc. And every now and then you get a Wonder Woman or someone else, a female hero who comes through. But it's really been male dominated, and especially in terms of audience as well. Initially, superhero comics were read by everyone, and there was some effort to make more female heroes kind of access the whole audience. But then by the 1960s, you see we're only marketing to men, and you see even more and more heroes. So again, we're starting with this very narrow concept of who can be a superhero, which is men. And then over time, comics were for kids originally, and then kind of from the 60s to the 80s, we started to see a trend towards male teenagers, young adults, and we started to have an industry that's catering exclusively to these teens and young men. And so male heroes still, but then we start to see an increase in violence, an increase in aggression, this hypersexualization of the few female characters that are there. Female characters become very disposable in this era. So it continues to create this idea of men can be heroes, but the way they are heroes changed from the old like sock in the jaw of the old comics to now heroes killed. Now they're angry and it's all bloody and aggressive. And so what we have seen, thankfully, in recent years as comics is both the audience and the creators have changed over the past 2 decades. For the vast majority of comic book history, they've been written, drawn, edited by straight white men, which as a historian is fascinating because it gives us kind of a snapshot with each issue of what the sort of dominant male culture thought of the time in terms of gender representation and masculinity itself. But as we've seen more female readers, more female creators come in, the industry has started to move away from the kind of the dark aggression that characterized comics for some time, which I think is a valuable lesson in terms of how we grow generally, like have more input, have different voices. But and we've started to expand who can be a superhero. It's not just men anymore. We're starting to see a lot of female superheroes, and then a lot of fantastic female creators behind the scenes. It's still very slow. If you look at the movies, Marvel made 20 movies before they had one with a female lead. So it's slow going. Like even with Justice League, it's a bunch of dudes and Wonder Woman, which is what it was when they introduced the Justice League in 1960. So progress is very slow, but we're starting to grow and starting to expand the definition of what heroism is and who can be a hero.
Yeah. Has anybody wrote a comic book like, is Wonder Woman also asked to keep all the meeting minutes and do the dishes? Inquiring minds want to know.
Actually, yes. In the 1940s, there was a team called the Justice Society. So a bunch of different superheroes banding together. And Wonder Woman was on the team, but she was the team secretary.
I'm dead.
Yeah.
That's ridiculous. All right. Ben, Tim, Muchinga, what is toxic masculinity? Who wants to kick us off?
Okay. Yeah. So I think for me, the way I would define toxic masculinity, basically, we are looking at the socially constructed ways in which a man or a boy is expected to perform, and sometimes which are negative, and you don't also clarify why you are making them do that. So I think that's how I would put it, and mostly they tend to go against their will, and boys are really not given a platform to express what they really feel. So for example, they are taught to ignore their feminine traits, which they may have, and they are always encouraged to behave in a certain way, which is going to make them strong, which is going to make them stand out. So basically, that's how I would define it. Thank you.
Yeah, I think it's a beautiful definition. And for the person on the call today who's going, and what's wrong with that? What's wrong with men being asked to always be strong? What's wrong with them always having the appearance of knowing or of standing out? Is there something wrong with that we should be considering?
Exactly, yeah. So definitely there is something wrong which we need to be considering. Studies have shown that men also do have emotions, and they need to be shown that affection. So by that, we need to create a platform where they will need to express their vulnerability. You get the point. But now, if we keep on preventing them to express their vulnerability and consider them to be strong, they will be harboring a lot of things inside. So now those things which are being harbored inside, they keep on building up, and they also bring about mental health challenges. And so sometimes we are not, when you don't also give them a platform to express their vulnerability, when you don't clarify some things to them, they tend to respond in certain different ways. Others tend to be violent. Others tend to be abusive. Others tend to be aggressive. Why? Because that is what they know as being strong. But we can also show being strong by being there for your family, by taking care for your family, by not being aggressive. That means you are also a man. But mostly you realize that showing power over a woman, for example, commanding, that's what it is to be a man. You need to have a commanding voice. As a man, you need to stamp authority on each and everything you are doing. So now also that takes the opportunity of men learning from women, because you already consider yourself to be the best. So that doesn't give you room to learn and improve on what you already know. It's not a problem to tell men to be men, but they need to be human. That is one thing which we need to realize. They need to be human. The last time I was chatting with Laura, one news just hit me back at home where a woman was raped around midnight where she was drinking beer. So now everyone was like, it was her fault. Why was she drinking beer during midnight? As a woman, she was supposed to be home sleeping. So already that gives men a platform to say, fine, this rape was okay because this woman was not supposed to be in a bar at this time, but was given a man authority to rape a woman who has come to drink beer. So now when you look at all those things, because we've not shown men a better way in which they can express themselves, and that just continue to happen. So it is, yeah, we need to give boys a platform when they are young. They need to express their vulnerability. We also need to understand that they have feelings and they have emotions. They need to be taken care of as much as we do take care for the girls. And like that, that is the only way we're also going to keep these gender-based violence cases which are coming up. And we are now going to see theories of gender-based, theories of gender integration, which are focusing on women alone reducing. Because right now, when you look at theories of gender integration, you realize that they are mainly not focusing on bringing us together, but mainly it's uplifting women, which is not a bad thing. But we need to understand that we coexist, and what a man can do, a woman also can do. Yeah.
Yeah. And across the gender spectrum, right? One of the things in thinking about toxic masculinity is how it also reinforces the concept of a binary gender identity. And people can go back and watch our session on unlearning the binary. But, you know, it seems like, Mujinga, is something everybody needs to write down, right? It's such a simple idea, but so powerful, is that men are humans too, meaning that they are not meant to be devoid of their emotional world. They are not meant to be devoid of vulnerability, in need of touch, in need of care, in need of tenderness. Men are humans too. What a great place for people to interrogate. In what ways in your life every day do you deny your own humanity under the banner of I'm manning up? Ben, what were the lessons that you were taught as a child that either reinforced or maybe went completely in opposition to this idea of what is manhood, and that being very restricted? I often hear from people, I didn't really get any lessons. I knew I was just not to ever act like a woman. What were your lessons?
Yeah, thanks. And thanks, Machinga, for those comments. I'm really noodling on those. So many messages sent as kids from so many different, media and parents and friends. I think, first, I do want to start off of the, these messages and whatnot, but I will say, fast forwarding, as a dad, I see a lot of positive changes with the messaging these young kids are getting now, not across the board universally, but my 13-year-old who's going into 8th grade, he, him pronouns, he knows consent very well. It's just part of how he rolls and how they roll. That makes me very happy. My 6-year-old uses they, them pronouns without batting an eye. It's just, and trans kids is just, it's just a matter of fact. So I have a lot of reasons to be hopeful. And I think of some of the messages we were sent. I mean, it almost pains me to say this, but I remember hearing people discussing, well, if same-sex couples adopt, the kids will be, teased, right? And all these little things. But while I had great role models, I believe, that were not advancing toxic masculinity per se, I was deeply, deeply rooted in a fear of conflict and a right to comfort. And you can call that whatever you want, a privilege or white privilege or what have you. And I think, you know, where my harm that I've caused has not necessarily been as a bad actor, but as a silent actor. I have let so many things slide on my watch, even though my gut is telling me otherwise. And I've had to interrogate why am I quiet? Why was I quiet there? Because that's selfish and comfortable. And I think if we are going to unlearn toxic masculinity, it's not just about perpetrators of violence and misogyny. It's about the rest of us who are being quiet and not interrupting. There was a heat wave in Seattle recently, as you know, Lindsay. A couple weeks ago, a friend and I went to Magnuson Beach to chill out, literally. And it was on a Thursday, and there was day campers there. And a group of 8-year-old boys in the lake were taunting one of their peers, you know, Jimmy's in the kiddie pool, Jimmy's in the kiddie pool, he probably wets his bed. And I'm sitting there cringing. I am all in my head about this. I'm exhausted. My friend and I are wiped out. She and I, we didn't say anything. The counselors didn't say anything. I'm exhausted. I'm telling myself I'm tired. I don't have this in me. The counselors are closer. They should say something. Who am I to police these kids' behavior? I'm not their parent. Some of them were kiddos of color. I'm like, who am I to come in and police? Like, I didn't do anything, right? And I was all in my head, and I justified, why did I not interrupt that? Which I believe is a toxic masculinity in a scenario with 8-ish-year-olds, right? Yeah. But similar is my silence. I could have easily gone up without making a big deal or putting that kid on the spot and mentioned quietly to one of the counselors something like, hey, I'm just over here. I know this isn't my business. I don't want to micromanage or overstep, but like, it is breaking my heart seeing these kids go in on this little dude. I just need to let you know. Like, there could have been a middle ground there, right? And to me, toxic masculinity was not just those boys taunting and making fun of this kid, but me being quiet. If I had said something to those counselors, would that have changed anything? I have no idea. But if I do that most times in perpetuity throughout my life, and everybody on this call does, and we influence others, I think just like bullying, how do you focus on the bystanders and the interrupters? I think that's how we really change toxic masculinity. Because the messages I was sent as a kid, like, I knew better. I had good values and enough awareness to know, like, that's not right. But I wasn't doing anything about it.
Yes.
And that's the problem, I think. And so that's what I think a lot about. And how do we support people in disrupting the silence? And that's the same thing I had to learn as an executive director at a nonprofit, right? Interrupting white silence and microaggressions. Even in grad school, studying social work on the south side of Chicago, right? A white student would say something racist and harmful. And 9 times out of 10, it's a Black classmate that's calling them out or saying something. And I'm nodding along in my head. I'm trying to support that Black student in the hallway after class, but I'm just sitting there not jeopardizing anything. And so that's a lot of the messages. I think, like, man, why was I so quiet my whole life? Yeah. Long answer. I'm sorry to take up so much space with that.
No, but thank you. I think everybody, I can see even in the comments that people are having a reaction to maybe asking themselves the same question. When have I been silent and not been as, I love when you talk about your children. My children use this word language. When have I not been an upstander, right? Instead of a bystander, an upstander. It's a good question, and it's reminding me of that quote, and I'm going to butcher it, but the only thing that allows evil to prevail is when good men do nothing, right? I'm going to ask one more question, and then just to let everybody know, in our space that we're creating together, we're going to give Stephen an opportunity to take a couple of minutes break and rest themselves. Tim, how does this show up in the stories that we tell? You started to walk us through some of the history of comic books. How does misogyny culture get woven and thread into the very heroes that we are celebrating.
Yeah, it starts with, back in the day, men were superheroes, women were damsels in distress. And if that's the framework you're building on, that's going to continue through in the decades that follow, especially, I mean, my field is comics, and comics is hugely nostalgia based. So all these old stories that we like to tell over and over again have all of that wired into it. And then it continues on and on. And like I was saying before, as we target men more specifically, women become hypersexualized. And there are all these ways, like there's the obvious things, Superman gets to have sleeves and pants and a cape, and Wonder Woman wears the bathing suit. It's so obvious, but then when you see it, you're like, oh crap, yeah, that's not great. But then in comics specifically, there are like the obvious sort of clearly egregious thing, like say comics in the 90s, the hypersexualization, the exaggerated way they drew women's bodies is terrible. And you can point it out and say, hey, this is bad and sexist and not good. But like Ben was saying, it's the smaller things that are like a little more insidious that you have to take notice of. Everyone can see, oh, this is a sexist act. This is a bad actor that we can kind of stand up against. It's the smaller things that are kind of woven into the background that we take for granted, that we kind of have to look back and take a broader view and try to now analyze and work out of our system. So for comics specifically, it's that damsel in distress narrative. It's that the men comes first and these women are side characters that orbit them. That's so normal in comics that like even the most kind of well-meaning reader wouldn't clue into it because that's how it's always been. But if you can take a step back and go, oh, okay, we're not prioritizing women here. It's men in the center all the time. Women are side characters. Women are often disposable. We need to pick that apart and then kind of move forward in a way that's more inclusive for everybody.
Yes, yes, yes. I mean, now my mind is just a dance with, all of these characters that you're naming. I will say in the most recent Thor, I'm pretty sure the hammer, okay, the hammer comes to her, right? Jane, is that her name? Yeah. If you haven't seen it, no spoilers, but who saved the world that time? Just quietly. Yeah. Okay. Check it out. We're going to take just a couple minutes break right now for Stephen. During this time, we ask you to practice silence. Somebody on this call is maybe starting to notice patterns in their own life where some of the ways that they were raised, some of the ways that they were cultured, even some of what they've worked their whole life to attain as somebody who's been cultured male or is male presenting, what they thought was the best version of that. They've been trying to be that in their partnership. They've been trying to be that in their workplace. They've been trying to do that because of their religious faith. But they're realizing that it has both been hurting them and potentially people around them. Machinga, what is your advice to that person, to that man or male presenting individual on this call who's starting to rethink the entire way that they move through the world, and it's hard work?
Okay, thank you for that question. Yeah, I think firstly, I'll try to borrow. I would like to ride on Ben's idea, where he talked about his career as a social worker during his undergraduate. Yeah, so I think I would pick it from that because that's what I also did for my undergraduate. And now it was very difficult for me to be accepted in class and also in my community, because to start with, in my community, if a guy studied social work, that means are not intelligent and they don't have any meaningful impact to the community. So now, in the hostel where I was bullied, which was a big challenge to me. I remember that semester where I scored C's all around 5 courses because of how bullied I was, and I had to go and see the student counselor because of that. So what am I trying to put across? There was a certain way in which the world wanted to define me, and there was also a certain way in which I was seeing myself. So at the end of the day, I decided to start loving myself more and taking the things which people are telling me as second option. I remember at some point my mother telling me, "Sir, with this attitude, you're too slow. Can you be a medical doctor? You as a man, you're not so fast in, you do things, you get the point." But I sat down and I thought, in me trying to be the version of what people are telling me, I'm not going to achieve anything. So at the end of the day, let it be religion, let it be theories, let it be whatsoever a person believes in. I decided to start believing in myself and redefining who is me and what can I do. And the moment I realized that, I'm telling you, most of my friends who were laughing at me, by the time we're finishing school, before I'd even graduated, I found myself, I had already found work, I was already working, and I even started employing some of those friends of mine who perceived to be doing better courses than I was doing. Some of them I even started mentoring them. Why? Because I didn't want the society to define me, and I believed in my own abilities. So that person who feels they are in a state of confusion with their religion, what the society perceives them, at the end of the day, them as an individual, they know what they want to achieve. Otherwise, in them trying to live how people are perceiving them to be, they lose themselves out. I've got 2 examples which I can give. On 2 occasions, I almost got jailed as a teen because I wanted to succumb to what the society perceived me to be. For example, I'm one person who never liked engaging myself in fighting. So on this day, I think it was a Saturday in my high school, one of my friends came to me. He was like, "You, can you fight? You should be like Michael Tyson. You're a man. I've never seen you fighting." Then now this boy wanted to pick up a fight with me. He started by punching me. I walked away. He followed me. So now everyone around me, my friends, were in a boarding school. They started laughing at me because I started crying. Then they were like, "Look at you, you're crying as if you're not a man. You need to fight for yourself. If you don't fight for yourself, no one is going to fight for you." So what did I do? In me trying to respond to this crowd, I decided to fight back. And now in the end, I fractured that guy and I broke his rib. And it was bad. He was carried on a stretcher. And now everyone in school, those who are pushing me to fight, turned against me. And they were like, "You've injured a person, and if he dies, you are going to go to jail." 2 hours later, I saw the police coming in school with his parents coming after me. Initially, I never wanted to fight. I tried to run away from that fight. But because of this pressure, which was coming from all angles, and now trying to prove a point that I'm a man, I decided to fight back. And the moment I injured that person, everyone ran away. No one was there to support me. But he tried to take the same person I injured. He told the father to say, "You know what? This guy, even if he has done this to me, I forced him to do this." So since then, I told myself, say, I'll never succumb to peer pressure. If my heart tells me not to fight, I'll never fight. I'm going to follow my instincts. And that's how I've started shaping myself. At the end of the day, I know I want something better for myself, and no one is going to love me more than I can love myself. Since then, I put myself as priority and I keep on listening to myself before I can even consider any other advice. Yeah, thank you.
Wow. Wow. Each time I was like, okay, remember that gem so that you can echo it back. Then came another gem whiching up. But like this call for men to love themselves and not to think of their role as just being protector for their family, being protector in your workplaces, but to actually interrogate the resources of your own mind and heart and body and figure out how you love yourself. I think that that's hugely powerful. We have an entire section in bookstores dedicated to professional development, and yet we market them to women while marketing business books to men, and that being
Yes. Mhm.
the line of professional development. But I have to say, you know, Tim, Ben, and Virginia, I often find myself at a loss when I'm listening to CEOs and executive directors and other types of leaders who are bringing great rigor within their companies and great rigor in their passion to grow and develop and stretch themselves, but seem to have no skills to apply that same rigor to how they enact their character, how they activate their values, how they treat people. Why is that, Tim or Ben? Why is it that we and I want to name, this might be my own bias and maybe my own internalized trauma, so I want to be honest there, but I feel like we give a pass to men within our society. We kind of turn ourselves and say, oh, you know, they're just being boys. Oh, you can't expect that much from a man. As a Black woman who has to give 200% every time my contemporaries are giving 100%, I'm not going to lie, it doesn't feel fair all the time. Why do we expect less of men?
Yeah, it's just, I think societally, it's not expected of us at all. Like there's no pressure a lot of times internally or externally to do it. And I think we have to learn how to put that internal pressure on ourselves if we're not going to get it from the outside. I remember when I was in university and I was researching Wonder Woman, I did my master's thesis on Wonder Woman. And I read a lot about feminism, and from like Simone de Beauvoir to like women's lib in the 70s, just to kind of understand the background of the character. And in doing that, I learned so much about feminism. I was like, oh, dang, there's the patriarchy, and this is the way society works, and this is a problem. And when you get to that stage, you can either go, all right, I can continue to benefit from this system that clearly is working for me, or I can try to move forward in a way that recognizes the imbalance in our society and try to take that into account. So I think that gives me like an internal motivation to try to be better in the ways I interact with people and the way I do my work, the way I interact with friends, whatever. So if we can try to spur that internal motivation in others, I think it would get us a lot further, because thus far in modern society, it's not coming from the outside a great deal.
Yeah. Before I turn it over to some audience questions, I think I would be remiss if I didn't also name, and Ben, maybe you can speak to this, in what ways do those who have been socialized as women also uphold toxic masculinity within our culture?
Ooh, that's a big one. That's a good question. I mean, I just think of another incredible local Seattle-based author, Ijeoma Oluo, whose most recent book, Mediocre, The Dangerous Legacy of White Male America, I recommend for everybody, because it just underscores how woven into the DNA of this country patriarchy and white male privilege is, and white mediocrity is, and how it's been able to thrive. And that's why I love the title of this thing, Unlearning. I like words like dismantle. I know we're changing our vernacular and vocabulary all the time, but I think, again, we're all gatekeepers of something. And I don't know if it's my place to speak for women, but I think we can all be complicit in not undoing these harmful things, and what messages we're sending and what messages we're not sending. I mean, again, I think I had good role models, pretty healthy childhood. I became a licensed social worker most of my career in direct services. I said something along the lines of, it's a sign of strength to reach out for help. And I believed that. Nevertheless, I didn't feel comfortable going to therapy until deep into my adult life for some reason. And I'm like, man, even with all that context, it was hard for me to overcome the self-stigma of seeing a therapist. There's a lot of people in my life who are probably complicit in that, some of whom identified as women. And I just think, how do we start shifting that narrative and doing it earlier? I see some people on this call who specialize in like socio-emotional learning with kids, and I love that, using art. I think I saw somebody on here, My Mommy, the artist. Follow her on Instagram. She's amazing, using art to teach kids healthy social and emotional stuff. And again, I think it goes back to self-love. I caused the most harm as a human, as a leader, when I wasn't in touch with what Machinga said, which is self-love. That is true liberation, when we can love ourselves and have grace for ourselves to not be perfect. And as I've shedded my perfectionism through therapy and my own work, I've been more grounded. When you're more grounded, you can move through that discomfort. You can accept feedback as a gift and not as an indictment on what a horrible person you are. And just carrying anger and aggression, it eats at our soul, and so your question's a big one. I don't know, but I know I'll speak for me and say I'm still unpacking and unlearning a lot. And I think I had pretty good role models and friends and people around. Now, and I want to say, I don't like toxic masculinity. It's a problem, but we have to look at the systems and not just the individuals who are perpetuating. Because when I was a counselor doing home visits on the south side of Chicago with these incredible young people who I was their counselor or counselor intern, these beautiful young kids are exposed to so much economic depression and guns that they have to flex just to make it through the day. And so I want to be careful that we're not judging and blaming the flexors for this toxic masculinity, when these kids are literally doing that because of the systems and policies that we have allowed to flourish, to where that violence and poverty and oppression is happening. So we can talk about these individual behaviors and micro stuff. It matters. I should have said something to that counselor on the beach. Okay, I should not be off the hook from that. And we got to look at these larger systems and policies, right? Just like Professor Ibram X. Kendi's talking about his book, systems and policies when it comes to dismantling racism. The same is around toxic masculinity, right? Like what policies and systems are we supporting or not that feeds into this stuff? How are we voting, spending our money, using our influence and whatnot? Because a lot of it's bigger than the individual or their parents or their social circle.
Yes. Oh, what an amazing call out. Absolutely. And I think that's a great reminder that we can often, when we talk about dealing with imposter syndrome, when we make it all about the woman or all about the BIPOC individual, et cetera, as opposed to the larger system that was built to intentionally make people feel excluded. And same here. Thank you for that reminder that it's an entire system that we are all breathing, eating, marinating in. And the entire system needs to be addressed collectively. Wow. Wow. Couple things coming up in the chat window. I want to welcome you to come off and ask yourself, Amanda Powter, but I can also read this aloud for you. But if you raise your hand quickly, then I'll know that you're going to come off and read it in 3, 2. Okay, I'm reading it. Amanda Powter asked, comic books and other nerd circles, e.g. video games, are seen as particularly adept at breeding, concentrating toxic masculinity. Are they simply visible reflections of the larger culture? Or are there particular characteristics that make these communities and subject areas susceptible or receptive to it? I think that's a question for you, Tim.
Yeah, toxic masculinity is not unique to these kind of nerd communities, obviously, but they definitely are a more susceptible breeding ground for it. I think largely because for decades, men have been catered to so exclusively in these places, that now that things are changing and growing and more people are getting involved that don't look like them, there's a lot of pushback. It's a lot of the things you see in the people who are more actively toxic masculinity wise in the community now. It's they want things to be the way they used to be. There's the quote about how if you're in a privileged position, equality can feel like oppression, and I think there's a lot of that going on. And yeah, so definitely not unique to the community, but well suited for it, especially with nerd communities. Gatekeeping is such a big thing. It's all about like your knowledge base and kind of encyclopedically testing each other. You have to know everything. You have to be involved in everything. There's no real kind of embracing of casual fans or people who are new. So that contributes to it as well. But a lot of times any concerns about, oh, they're not real fans or things like that is kind of concern masquerading itself as sexism.
Mm, mm. There was a comment here from, I think, Margot and Deborah talking about in women and across the gender spectrum, their role in perhaps unwittingly, unintentionally upholding some of the characteristics of toxic masculinity. I think if we explore concepts around linked fate, around how our fate can be linked to existing power structures. And so there's a lot of great research out there around why do women still consistently at 51, 52% of the time vote for candidates who are clearly not in their best interest. And so linked fate is really great research to look at the ways that within the power privilege kind of scale, why would women also be interested in upholding white supremacy culture and upholding patriarchal cultures? And so it is unintentional, but when we talk about intent versus impact, right? I can be unintentionally homophobic, unintentionally transphobic, unintentionally ableist, but once you know better, do better, right? And so at what point does it stop being unintentional and it turn into, yeah, I know it's bad, but it serves my power privilege status? So many great things coming up here today. And as we begin to close this space that we've created for one another, Tim, Lachinga, Ben, any final thoughts on what, and I know, Ben, you referred to your children, what is it that you're excited about when you are looking at this next generation of men and the way that they are being cultured? What is it that is giving you maybe a little bit of hope?
I had the privilege last week through my work with my company in the area productions to interview a man named Jason Wright. He's the president of the NFL team, the Washington Commanders, and talk about a history of a toxic masculinity in the workplace and what Jason and his team are already doing in the first couple of years to revamp that workplace gives me a lot of hope and how intentional it's been. And to hear Jason and see other NFL players talking about therapy and mental health and the national discourse around mental health, and some of the brave and bold leaders we've seen dealing with some of this publicly, from Simone Biles and Naomi Osaka. These conversations give me a lot of hope. As I mentioned, my oldest child's 13. I went to pick him up at a friend's house the other day, and I went up to the door. I'd never been there before. I actually don't know who the person is. And my son kind of comes out creeping. I'm like, what's going on in there, dude? This seems shady. He's like, oh no, dude, my dude's just on a virtual therapy call. And he just said it like nothing. And I don't know if we would have done that back when I was 13, like there would have been more stigma there. So all these little data points make me hopeful. I know that in Seattle is different than many pockets of our country. But in my little microcosm of life, there is a lot that gives me a lot of hope. And I'll finally say, I have friends who have a trans son, and that kiddo is at summer camp, sleepover camp. And I asked them, how have you felt about the camp's handling of gender stuff? 10 out of 10, they said. Their inclusion committee, all the questions, it was just so intentional. I imagine it took so much work for this camp to get to where it was probably 5 years ago to now. But to see these parents of a trans kiddo be like, yeah, that camp was on it, that makes me very hopeful that with intention and commitment, we can do things radically better than we ever have before.
Yeah. Tim, Uchenga, any final thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, anytime I get to be around kids, like if it's writing workshops or like even just hanging out with my nieces or whatever, like the generation coming up behind us now is really pushing things in ways mine never did. Like I'm in my mid-30s now, so there's a whole new generation coming, and they're exploring new ways to define masculinity and gender as a whole. And it's really exciting for me to see that and to be able to like get on board to say, oh, okay, they're going further than I had ever thought about. And now I get to adapt myself to all these cool new ideas, like cool new developments, and try to adapt myself to make them feel comfortable and to give them the space to fully explore and express themselves and what they want to make of masculinity and gender. And it's a really cool thing to watch and to get to be a part of when I can.
Wow. Uchenga, final thought today?
Okay. Yeah, so I think I'll try to link my final thoughts to some of the experiences I've had while in the States, because I've just trying I've been trying to do some comparatives, and some of the things I think I observed. I think in the Western world, things I think are moving better, because I think about 3 days ago, I was in West Philadelphia where I was conducting some community outreach programs on sexual reproductive health, where I was meeting some Black communities and what. So we're discussing about consent, the importance of consent and things like that. So some of the things which were really coming out amongst boys, I loved the way they were able to open up and ask me questions. And one thing I think which really hit me hard was a boy who told me how sometimes he feels uncomfortable to talk to his parents about sexual related things and just about his gender identity and things like that. And he takes advantage of YouTube and Google to search things. And he's like 16 years old. That's the boss talking to me. So now, for me, what I really liked is him even making such efforts to search for the truth, because he's got access to internet. Then also when he talked about consent, saying, I cannot force a woman into doing something which she does not agree with me. I really liked that. And when I look at that, indeed, the future looks great, and young men are beginning to appreciate that. Now, taking it back to where I'm coming from, I feel it's still an uphill battle, but that's why there are also young men like me who need to champion that and recruit more young men. So, for example, I think some of the things which are really contributing to toxic masculinity in the communities where we are coming from is dowry. When you look at the bride price, you know, sometimes in our country, young men are really being charged a lot of money when they want to marry. And, you know, that already is bringing up like attaching a certain tag and expectation to a woman when she goes in marriage, because a man will be like, I paid like $1,000, $2,000 in order for me to marry. So you need to do this, you need to do that, you need to do this. So if such kind of things are not taken away, I still feel we have a long way to go. The other thing which I'm looking at is, you know, back at home, when men and women are going to marriage, for a woman, she will be having lessons like for a week, where they'll be teaching how to treat a man, how to take care of a man, and what. Yet a man will just be busy with his own business, not being taught how to take care of a woman and things like that. So again, that means a woman is going into that marriage as a slave. So those are some of the things which we really need to redefine. However, with what we can do, we are trying to come up with different community projects and activities where we are trying to mentor these young boys. Some things which they cannot really get in the households because of the cultural barriers and religious barriers which are existing. We are trying to see, as young men, who knows what the future holds and how best we can be there for other young men not to go through what we went through. We are trying our level best to inform them, to enlighten them, to make them understand. But I still feel we have a long way to go, but nothing is impossible if we believe, and we'll continue to put in our best and challenge this call. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much, everybody. Tim, Muchinga, Ben, my co-host, Stephen, our show's producer, Laura Kay. Our final thought to leave us on, I was reading recently, on average, young boys stop receiving physical affection as early as 5, 6, or 7. They stop receiving any physical affection and therefore start to look for sexual affection because of that starvation at much earlier ages. When's the last time you just walked over one man to another man and just gave a hug, held hands, sat on the couch, what we might consider too close to one another? Why is this denied to you when we know that it is a basic human need? Why is this being denied to you under the banner of manning up? Our little boys are starved for their humanity, and each of us can leave this space taking it upon ourselves, as Ben was charging us, to be that upstander, to demand it back, not just men for men, but also women for men, all of us across the gender spectrum, to give one the invitation to their humanity is the greatest gift that you can give anyone. I hope you learn to love you as I love you. Goodbye, everybody. How did we go, everyone? Did you have fun?
That was great.
Sorry, I can never eat until after the panel. So every time afterwards, I'm like, finally, I'm going to eat some crackers. Anything you feel like that went unsaid, that was on your mind or on your heart to share?
No, I think we hit all the stuff I was thinking we would touch on. I think it went really well.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, nothing. I felt anxious because I don't feel like I'm an expert, but I really appreciated the beginning, you saying all you need to do is speak your truth, and just really appreciate the stage you set for all of us to kind of just show up and riff together. I really appreciated that.
Yeah, for me it was really a great platform and such a big privilege, because it's like the first time I'm speaking to such an audience, so it was just awesome. And yeah, I didn't expect it actually to go this way. I'm so grateful for the platform which you created, and also just the speakers. Yeah, it was so encouraging, and I've really learned a lot. Thank you so much. I appreciate. Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
you all were dropping just like, Laura, yeah, like there were
I have a lot of notes that are like that entire section about everything at once. I'm like, Tim's this monologue here. Yeah, we'll be pulling the quotes.
Yeah, normally when I'm listening, I try to like find the diamond and then I echo it back. This whole time you all were like, diamond, 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 diamond. It's like, man, and I have to start taking notes.
Just gonna leave that one there.
Like, no, which one can I pull out of this entire necklace here? I think the call to love for men to pursue their own love of self and to stop being what so many people tell them. I was thinking as you all were sharing, lately I've started all the like women in business or women CEO or, Black women feeds that I follow on Instagram. I've been sharing them with my partners saying like, just ignore the hashtag women part because, it feels like there's a lack of the same messaging, but it's the same thing that his own spirit is desperate to hear. And I thought it was really powerful thinking about it was necessary and important that we focused on little girls and on women, but did we come alongside to focus on the language that we were reimagining for little boys as they've come up? Yeah. Stephen, what did you think? Anything that came up? Stephen is also a social justice worker and teacher. Anything, Stephen, that stood out for you?
All right. I'm glad to be here tonight. A very interesting section so far. And I just add little to what a lot of people have said. So in this period of time, we need to really focus on gender equity, at least to make both gender balance. And with this, we'll be able to really cover a lot of things because of recently these days, you realize men's boy, they go through a lot of things, even more than the women. Where you can easily see, and the woman can easily be hard in the society. Like the issue of domestic violence, how we talk about the domestic violence, you see a lot of women, they will say, men are beating their women, boys are beating girls. Or what a lot of women are doing to their husband, or girls are doing to the boy, is more worse than what the men are doing. But the men we see, like, we already see us like who is someone who is strong, and we hardly show out what is really going on. So when the environment, when the society has this gender equality, a lot of things we'll be able to see and be able to balance the whole thing. So I won't be able to say much tonight. Actually, I'm not really in the mood to talk much. So I just want to chip in a bit. Thank you.
Yeah. But it is, I think, I would love to see more writing talking about, I've been exploring gaslighting and how gaslighting seems like the only tool that we actually teach young men in terms of how they engage within relationships. It is without giving them any emotional language or emotional skills, then your default behavior is going to be to try to just shut down the conversation or to stonewall or to deny the other's version of the truth. And so it's almost like we keep, and I think, Virginia, you were talking about this in terms of we breed the circumstances that occur, but then we only talk about the symptom, not the actual problems all along the way, the system, as Ben was talking about, that led us there.
I also just want to add the chat was blowing up. I'm sure you were all seeing and like maybe half following, also having to actually answer the questions. But this had so much back and forth, and I'm capturing some of the threads that the participants were going on, because there were just so many discussions that came from one of you would speak, and then there's a whole spin-off conversation going on the side, and just overall hearing from people at the end, like, you know, Hazel said that they're gonna go back and call their brothers and let them know I love them. And it's that kind of thing that's like, okay, so Hazel is calling their brothers tonight. Like that's a real thing that's happening today because of what you were talking about. And I know there were conversations about wanting sort of starting prompts for the kind of story that Ben you shared, where you walked up and said something. And so one of the follow-up pieces I'm going to include is these starter sentences that Crystal provided, for example, and some of our own. And I may tap you in to get input on that, or as more questions come up from the audience. But I really think there are a few tangible, you talked about a few tangible resources, books that I've taken down. I think we can really give people ways to carry this forward and have it be, in addition to the inspiration that they felt in this conversation, have it be something they can actualize. Yeah, thank you so much. It's so heartwarming to witness this and to know that, we're creating more spaces for young kids, in particular, to just be raised a different way so they don't have to go through the same thing.
Thank you. Hey, before we sign off, would you all be comfortable if I tried to take a screenshot real quick? Would that be okay?
Love it.
Okay,
Okay.
you have to tell us when to pause so we can get our smile face.
Right,
Okay,
right.
just give me a second. Almost there.
Look
I'll let
candid.
you know. Yeah.
Look at
Right. Okay. No parameters. Do whatever you want, but I'll do 3, 2, 1. Click. 3, 2, 1. All right. Thank you.
Beautiful. Okay, just in closing, Tim, I have to tell you, somebody approached me about becoming a character in their video game. And, it was called like Blacklash, and it was all about this culture of trying to promote Black characters in the gaming world. And they were like, we can, she'll be kind of like the Oracle in the Matrix and blah, blah, blah. And I was like, yeah, I want her to be an old crone who just is really wise. But I was like, I will not be presented as this, sexualized character. I was like, I will be old, and like my boobs will be down to like my hips. And if you're fine with that, then the answer is yes. And he was like, let me think about it. I was like, yeah, well, same fucking tropes, dude. Anyway, I'm in love with all of you. Thank you for spending your time with us today. And hopefully I'll be in touch with you soon.
Thank you. Thank you so much.